The relationship between critics and the movies they watch has never been more strained or complex than it is today, especially social media redefining who qualifies as a critic. Sometimes people talk smack about you or your work on the internet. I wouldn't know how that feels. Yet filmmakers have often responded to their critics by addressing them, either directly or through thinly veiled allegory in their subsequent films. Rather than simply whining about Rotten Tomatoes dissuading people from seeing their movies, these films got sweet revenge on their critics in playful, savage, and ingenious ways. So let's take a look at how they did it. I'm Adam, this is Whatculture, and here are 10 awesome ways movies got back at critics. Number 10. Leonard Molton got killed by Gremlins after giving the first movie a bad review, Gremlins 2: The New Batch. Joe Dante's ludicrously entertaining meta-sequel to Gremlins features a hilarious cameo from film critic Leonard Molton, who famously panned the original film and gamely showed up in the sequel only to be murdered by a gang of the mischievous titular critters. The scene sees Molton reviewing Gremlins on VHS, where he says he'd rather spend 2 hours having root canal work done, prompting the Gremlins to strangle him to death with a roll of film while he desperately shouts, "It's a 10! It's a 10!" In recent years, Molton has discussed the cameo, noting that he's old friends with Joe Dante and felt bad about giving Gremlins a negative review. As such, when Dante floated the idea of him appearing in the sequel, Molton felt like he owed it to his friend to do it. The result was not only a deliciously self-aware movie moment clearly taken in good humor by both parties, but Molton actually ended up giving the film 3 stars, and all was well once more. Number 9. A 2-star review was cleverly hidden in a poster, Legend. The 2015 Tom Hardy starring vehicle Legend received broadly positive reviews from most critics. However, The Guardian's Benjamin Lee wasn't too keen, giving it 2 stars while dubbing it a cartoonish Greys biopic. Hilariously, however, the movie's marketing team decided to have a little fun with this by sneakily including the newspaper's negative review on one of the film's posters. By placing the 2 stars in between the heads of Hardy's Greys, it gave the impression that The Guardian had actually given it more stars than they did, given that every other review in the column gave it 4 stars. If that ain't marketing genius, what is? Lee took the clever sleight of hand in mostly good humor though, and warned audiences about the dangers of slippery marketing aimed to mislead them. Number 8. George Lucas named General Kale after critic Pauline Kael, who trashed Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Willow. Pauline Kael is probably the second most famous and influential film critic who has ever lived, second only to Roger Ebert of course, and her notoriously ruthless approach to destroying movies she hated earned her plenty of ire and fear in Hollywood. Kael famously called Star Wars: A New Hope an epic without a dream, and dismissed Raiders of the Lost Ark as a machine-tooled adventure, while declaring George Lucas to be in the toy business. In a feat of hilarious revenge, Lucas declared to name the villain in his 1988 cult classic fantasy film Willow after Kale, with Pat Roach's villainous army commander literally named General Kale. In her review of the film, the critic deemed the nod a hommage à moi. In more playful terms, Willow did also feature a nod to legendary critic team Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, with its 2-headed dragon being named Ebersisk. Given that Siskel and Ebert gave generally favorable reviews to Lucas's movies, however, it didn't come loaded with quite the same antagonism. Number 7. Jay and Silent Bob traveled the US beating up online trolls. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is the self-aware pinnacle of Kevin Smith's filmmaking career, a gloriously funny stoner road trip where Jay and Silent Bob head to Hollywood to stop a terrible movie being made about the superhero comic book they were the basis for, Blunt Man and Chronic. The film is driven by Jay's desire to beat the crap out of anyone who has ever besmirched their good names on the website Movie Poop Shoot, a gossamer-thin parody of Ain't It Cool News. This comes to a head when comic book writer Holden McNeil reminds the pair that they can't feasibly go around assaulting everyone who slagged them off online. But in the film's hysterical finale, the duo take their newly found royalty money to travel around the US attacking the hateful online commenters, be they punk kids, businessmen, or even priests. And it's not even the first time Smith traveled to have fun trolling his critics. When Christians protested his classic 1999 religious satire Dogma, Smith disguised himself as a protester, held up a sign reading "Dogma is dog shit," and even stayed in character when he scored a TV news interview. Number 6. Mel Brooks depicted critics as literally on art, History of the World Part 1. Trust Mel Brooks to find a way to get back at his critics in a manner both classy and vulgar. For though Brooks was on a 6th movie critical winning streak when his 1981 anthology comedy History of the World Part 1 hit screens, he nevertheless felt like giving his detractors a snappy dressing down. In one of the film's very first scenes, Brooks depicts the birth of humanity's very first artist in the Stone Age, creating a beautiful cave painting that astounds his fellow early men. The narrator, voiced by Orson Welles for an extra laugh, then introduces an art critic, telling the audience with the birth of an artist came the inevitable afterbirth, the critic. At this point, said critic climbs on a rock and proudly urinates all over the cave painting in a totally unsubtle yet absolutely hilarious dissection of creator to critic relations. And in case you're curious, the film ended up receiving broadly positive reviews from the press regardless. Number 5. Siskel and Ebert are revealed to be aliens, they live. John Carpenter's incredible sci-fi satire revolves around the efforts of a drifter, Nada, to reverse a covert alien invasion on Earth, where the aliens pose as the ruling class and attempt to control regular folk through media manipulation and capitalism. The film's fantastically abrupt punchline of an ending sees Nada finally destroying the signal that allows the aliens to maintain their human disguises, revealing their true skeletal form to the world. This leads to a brief aside where a film critic, whose suited-up appearance and nasal voice are clearly intended to parody Gene Siskel of Siskel and Ebert, decries the excessive violence in modern cinema, and how directors such as John Carpenter and George A. Romero have to show some restraint. Granted, Siskel and Ebert were both quite charitable towards these filmmakers in their heyday, so this isn't too much of a particular stab at those two critics as it is those who complain about their movies being too violent. Number 4. David Lynch featured Siskel and Ebert's negative review on posters, Lost Highway. In a move probably only David Lynch could actually get away with, he decided to include Siskel and Ebert's overwhelmingly negative review of his 1997 thriller Lost Highway on one of the movie's posters. To be clear here, Lynch didn't pull a legend and cleverly incorporate the 2 thumbs down into the poster somehow. He literally just set the quote at the top of the poster in gigantic lettering, while including a riposte below which said, 2 more great reasons to see Lost Highway. Lynch, being one of the most singular filmmakers Hollywood has ever seen, is no stranger to negative reviews of his out-there movies, and to many of his fans, knowing that the most famous 2-man reviewing team in the world hated Lynch's work would only make them want to see it more. The film ended up receiving polarizing reviews from most critics and was a box office dud, but endures today as a cult classic fiercely defended by Lynch diehards. Number 3. Pixar called out critical cowardice in the coolest way possible, Ratatouille. Pixar decided to take critics to task in a uniquely diplomatic way in Ratatouille, though considering the animation studio was on an unprecedented critical winning streak at the time of the film's release, they naturally had less of a motivation to relentlessly drag critics through the mud. Nevertheless, snooty critics were given a fun slashing by the way of the film's food critic character, Anton Ego, a pretentious and fickle man voiced with gravelly brilliance by Peter O'Toole. His climactic review of Remy's Ratatouille dish seemingly makes a little attempt to mask the film's skeptical views of critics, noting that they risk very little and thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read, while adding that the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful. But because Pixar's just too nice to relentlessly bag on critics, Ego's review does also praise the utility of reviewers to risk something in the discovery and defense of the new. Given that Ego ends up praising Remy's dish and even bankrolling his new restaurant, clearly Pixar believes in a critic's capacity to change their jaded and cynical ways. Number 2. General Saris was named after film critic Andrew Saris, Galaxy Quest. Cult classic sci-fi comedy Galaxy Quest revolves around the cast of a long-dead cult sci-fi TV show being roped into a real intergalactic war, led by evil reptilian alien general Rothar Saris. If you're thinking that the name Saris seems a little too human-y for an alien who looks like that, then you would be right. The surname was in fact a direct reference to legendary film critic Andrew Saris, who was widely credited with popularizing auteur theory in film criticism. Saris's namesake was lent to Galaxy Quest's Big Bad due to Saris panning producer Mark Johnson's 1984 Robert Redford starring sports film The Natural, calling it a pathetic strikeout. Despite The Natural scoring largely positive reviews and landing 4 Oscar nominations, not to mention releasing 15 years before Galaxy Quest, apparently apparently Johnson knew how to hold a grudge. Saris meanwhile shrugged the air quotes honor off, declaring at the time, "It probably won't make enough money for me to sue for $10 million. I'm 70 years old. This guy wants to insult me? Oh, boo-hoo. As long as they spelled my name right, I'm okay." Number 1. It spun a 0% Rotten Tomatoes score into a meme, Gotti. John Travolta starring John Gotti biopic scored universal critical disdain, and today still holds an impressive 0 score on Rotten Tomatoes after more than 50 reviews. But when the critical drubbing started coming in, the marketing team made a curious pivot, flat out addressing the scorn as if the critics had a hidden agenda, calling them trolls behind a keyboard and basically implying that their reviews were fake news. A hysterical TV spot claimed that audiences loved Gotti, while critics put out the hit, almost immediately calling into question the film's suspiciously positive Rotten Tomatoes audience score, which was widely accepted to have been manipulated by a studio bot campaign. Still, you have to admire the audacity to embrace the hate for the film and try to flip it on critics. If nothing else, it got way more eyes on the movie than it otherwise could have ever had. It didn't matter in the end, of course, as Gotti couldn't even recoup its $10 million budget and ended up nominated for 6 Razzie Awards, including Worst Picture and Worst Actor for Travolta. Oof. And there we have it, folks, our list of 10 awesome ways movies got back at critics. But please do let us know down in the comments of your favorite way an actor or director or whoever got back at their critics. And while you're there, make sure you give us a like and a cheeky subscribe. If you want to follow me on socials, I am at Strawn87 across all socials. Come and say hello to me on there. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, week, and month. And until next time, take care.